So we had this lineup, and Jan was so thrilled because it meant that taking the time that she did, the 22 years, gave her this rich tapestry of performances in the film. I've seen it many times, and I have to say I'm moved all the time. I'm moved and dazzled by the spirit, by the humor, by the heroes, by my guys. It took me a while to get Jan to allow me to say my guys. She was very territorial about you all. She was very possessive and not into sharing at all. Is this not true? Oh, I'm talking behind her back. She'll tell you that's quite true. And the first time I said that over the phone, I said, my guys. She said, hold on just a moment. You know, you've only been with me a few weeks and you're calling them your guys. Anyway, it's really been an incredible journey for me to try to share and understand those times of your life that continues to give us so much. I thank everyone for everything, my wonderful medals and necklaces and pins and my beautiful change purse, my wonderful books. I have just so loved being here with you. You were gone while I badmouthed you. I did. You know, it's this possessive attitude that we've discussed that you have to make an adjustment.
You said I was hoarding the heroes.
Yeah, well, that's a good way to put it. I didn't. I will now use that word. She did. She hoarded the heroes.
Right.
So, do you have anything to say? You can say bad things about me now.
Not until you leave. How's that? Yeah. She'll cut me to shreds.
Now, talk about the film. I'm sorry that I can't sit out there and watch it yet again with you because it has such great, deep meaning for me. But I'm going to take 3 planes to get to where I'm going. My friend Jim is the only one who knows where Covington, Virginia is because he lived a few hours away from there. But that's where I'm going to be, and I'm going to be doing Eleanor, as in Eleanor Roosevelt. And then I go back to New York for a couple of days, and then I go out again to North Carolina, somewhere around Fort Bragg, where I'll be dealing once again with a bunch of my favorite people, i.e. the military. I'm meeting Jamie Farr and the Padre on MASH, Bill Christopher, and we're going to do just kind of Q&A and just schmooze and let everybody get to know us a little bit. I'm so thrilled that you still watch MASH and that generations of people continue to discover MASH. It is such a fine show. It had so many good things to say, and it was something that parents were not afraid to let their children watch because it seemed to give their children good values. And we like to think that MASH actually brought families together. And I hear them. I hear a lot where my children and their children watch. It became a family experience. I run home to watch MASH at 7 or 8, or I watch it before I go to sleep. And it's a very blessed way to live that I have been a small part of something of such magnitude that it reached out and touched so many lives. I get mail from women who became nurses because of what I did, because of how I played my nurse. there are no words to describe how that makes me feel, that I've left a footprint somewhere, but a meaningful one. Not how I want to be an actress because you're an actress and I want to go down red carpets and wear bling, but that they want to be the characters that I have portrayed, and that without knowing it, became such a role model. It's my birthday, forgive me. Everybody's calling in to say, what are you doing? Hello? Oh, well, thank you so much. It's one of my guys in St. Louis. Okay, I'm actually at a podium making a speech, so I'll have to call you back. Okay? Thank you, my dear. Isn't that nice? I want to thank you so much for being with me on my birthday. You've made it such a special, special birthday. And we could have actually done this different ways. We did this geography for a while with the calendar. Poor woman was having a nervous breakdown with my schedule. And then she who suggested, let's do it earlier, and then you can go do Eleanor and so forth. And I looked at it, and I thought, my gosh, I'll be with them on my birthday. That's perfect. And this is 2013. 13 has historically been my lucky number. So this has been a very rewarding, very rich, happy day for me, and I want to thank you all for sharing it with me, okay? I love you more than you'll ever know. Jan said if there's a question. Oh, there are questions, yes. Okay, there's David Ogden Stiers. He's almost an impresario. He's deeply into classical music, and he conducts philharmonics. You know, he also was the classical actor of the group. When we were on hiatus, he'd go off somewhere and do King Lear. So he's doing that. Jamie Farr and Bill Christopher, I will see the 9th, 10th, and 11th of this month at Fort Bragg. Mike Farrell is doing a little film, and I don't know where, but he's out of town. He wrote to me and said, I'm doing, so it must be an indie film. Alan lives about a block and a half away from me in New York. He's doing his, to quote his wife, he's out doing his science things. So he's always been interested in science. So he's doing a television series about with a science format. McLean is no longer with us. Larry Linville, Harry Morgan, and people you don't know like Dom Palmer was our wonderful cinematographer and then director, and he's gone. And a few of our background people have left us. And Gary Berghoff will not fly. So Gary Berghoff, radar. Gary lives in a motorhome. He spends winters in Florida and summers in Connecticut. That's all I know about Gary. Very often just, not very often, just communicated. Well, for example, when Harry died, everyone emailed. You know, we shared with me. I wrote a piece for a magazine and so forth. So we stayed very close. Not an effort. You don't experience 11 years like we did and not share a very deep bonding. You have a history that's a part of your life. And MASH is a very, very important part of my life. Anybody else had a question? Yes? What do you mean? You mean improvise? Yeah, no, there was, you don't really improvise very much. You have to do the work. We can fool around rehearsing. If something comes up during the rehearsal that's not in the script and it's good, it becomes a part of the script. It's no longer improvisation, so we just do it. Sometimes you get a funny, happy accident and they'll film it, and it's in. I was playing drunk in one of the episodes with Hawkeye and Trapper, so it was the first 3 years. And Larry Linville, my then lover, Frank Burns, came into the tent and said, "Margaret, you're drunk." And I say, "Right, Reverend Davidson." And it was funny, and he was left in a huff. And that was the scene, but I looked at Alan and Wayne and said, "Who was that?" It was so funny they kept it in. So once in a while, something like that, but basically you did the work. The outtakes were Christmas reel, and they were the funniest things you've ever seen. You can imagine if MASH was funny, the outtakes were really... I remember one outtake was of Harry Morgan. He walked through the door, the tent door, and tripped. And he fell right out of the frame. The camera was on his empty doorway, and Harry's voice came floating up saying, "Well, that won't work." Anybody else? Yes, back there.
Do you feel MASH was more about Vietnam or Korea?
MASH was about war, but it really was about medics during the war. We don't think of ourselves as a military show. It was really about medics trying to do the best they could, sewing bodies together who were not old enough to shave. It was that agony and that horror. Any war, it didn't matter. But it was Korea, because the MASH units were indigenous to Korea. And so, but Gene Reynolds, the executive producer, said it was, that kind of crept in. But what's the difference? We're saying the same thing. War is terrible. Let's get rid of it.
We have lots of seats over on this side for those who are coming in.
Yes,
so you can walk through the front here if you want.
Where was it all filmed, like with the helicopter?
Right, that was outdoors. It was the exterior in Malibu Canyon, a big, big piece of property called the Fox Ranch. And then there was a big fire there when we ended. And now they're constructing a little sort of shrine where hikers go up. They want to see where MASH was filmed, and so they go up there and see it. And the interiors were done at 20th Century Fox, Stage 9, which became very famous. Stage 9. That was MASH. Stage 9. Yes?
What was one of your favorite or your favorite MASH episode?
I liked the nurses because for the first time we saw my character being hurt, being actually showing that it could be very lonely at the top. They promoted them really fast in this area and during this police action. She wasn't old enough to be a major. She didn't have the experience to be a major. She woke up one day after nursing school and she was in Korea in charge of 25 nurses or whatever it was. And she thought she had to be tough. But it was a facade. And this was written to show the underneath. She tells the nurses in this one scene, she says, "Do you know what it's like to walk by your tent and hear you laughing and gossiping and know I'm not welcome? Know that you don't come to me and share a personal problem. You treat me like the enemy." And it was very touching. My mother called me the next morning and said, "For those moments, you weren't my daughter. I related to you like that lonely woman who didn't want to be there doing what she was doing, but she was trying her best." It was a very great compliment because first time my mother saw me on television, she called me and said, "What have they done to your eyebrows?" So for her to, that was many years later, of course, but this was so powerful. And I remember when I rehearsed it, Joan Darling was directing. She came to me and she said, let it go home. I don't want to rehearse that. Just come in tomorrow and we'll shoot it. It was so close to the top, to the depth and the top of that character. Anybody else?
Yes.
Yes.
You said you don't get upset or worried about anything anymore.
That's right. I'm not afraid.
Airport, you're going to be angry at Portland rush hour traffic.
Oh, so I should leave now. Okay. No, thank you. I can't miss this plane because the first thing I do when I land is talk to a school. I have three schools filled with kids who are probably going to ask the same questions, but we're hoping they're going to want to know about Eleanor, because she was a great lady, a great woman, the first lady of the world. And it's important, especially for the females, the little girls, to know what she did and to know that they're enjoying the fruits of what she did. Okay, so I'm out of here. I was just given an order, and I'm programmed to obey. God bless. The 7th. Okay. Peace. And how can I follow that? Right? Happy birthday. Safe travels. I have to, do you work? Hello? Is this working?
Yeah.
Okay, good. When she was talking about MASH.
No, it's not.
Oh, there we go. Okay. I teach. I have to teach. You're a documentary maker. You don't make any money. Okay? And I had already recorded every voice in my documentary last year before I met Loretta. You have to understand what the time frame and what this woman, she's like a dervish. That once I met her, things just went boom. Because I had worked on this film at that point 21 years. And when I got involved in this, it's because my dad was a POW, and I went to a convention with him and fell in love with all these men. And I walked out saying, why doesn't anybody know this? Why doesn't anybody know this story? And so I started to do research, but I knew, because I was already dabbling in documentary work, one of the other things I was doing at the time when I was making money was I was one of the directors for the Chicago Bulls and the White Sox. And that, you make a lot of money in sports. But it was boring. It was during Michael Jordan's time. Remember him? I know, kick myself, right? Who would have thought he would be one of the greatest guys? But I was there every game, and we kept winning, and we were in playoffs, etc. But I finally got the bug for documentary work. And I knew that this was going to be a tough project. And the reason was, after about 2 years of research, I couldn't find enough photos. I couldn't find film footage, okay? What was out there was propaganda by the Japanese. And a lot of it had been shot also at the end of the war. And the stories that I had been collecting were just, well, hopefully you'll find them fascinating too. And try to imagine what do you cover some of these stories with? Because there's no imagery. Well, what had happened was, I got lucky, was I started to think, well, there's got to be drawings. And one of my first conventions, it was the first convention, there was like 500 survivors. This was in San Francisco, I think it was in 91, maybe 92. And I was meeting all these men, and I said, you gotta meet Ben Steele. He was an artist. And I'm in this line waiting to go back someplace. We were waiting for ferries, okay? And we were on an island, not those type of ferries, okay? That type of ferries, okay? And, yes. And so I'm in humanity, and I'm thinking, well, I'm just going to start asking around to see if I can find Ben. And so I turn around to this couple behind me, and I said, hi, I'm Jan. Do you by chance know Ben Steele?
And the guy said, well, sort of, kind of. I'm Ben Steele. And he's like right there. And I've known him, and he was up on the panel today for some of you who listen to the POW panels. He's the guy who's done the artwork, and you just saw a portion of it. He's the man that was up on the POW panel where the rat ran across him, and if he could have, he would have eaten it if he had caught it. So, and so he's in the film, okay? I have one other person here, Jim Collier, who's in the front row, who is also in the film. But the difficulty, it wasn't I planned that this was going to take 21 years. It was doors slamming, etc. And Alec Baldwin, through Ben Steele, I was able to get to Alec Baldwin, and he called me up at home. And my grandchild was visiting me at that point, and he'd only been in my house for 15 minutes, and I was already through a bottle of wine. And I was looking at the clock thinking, God, I got this kid for the whole weekend. I don't know how I'm going to get through this weekend with this. I know a lot of you are talking about grandchildren and you like them. You can have my 3, okay? So the phone rings, and my husband says, oh, you got a call, Jan. It sounds like one of your students. And he says, hi, this is Alec Baldwin. And Ben had gotten to him and said, can you help my friend? I mean, at that point, I think it was year 17, okay? And so he agreed to help out. He says, well, what can I do? And I said, well, I've got several projects. And Alec narrated a shorter documentary for me called The Tragedy of Bataan, and it's only on the Death March. And he also narrated a 5-part radio series. So I had Alec. But I didn't have anybody else, and I had doors slamming, Kathleen Turner. And what's interesting about Kathleen Turner is her dad had been a captive of the Japanese, and in China. And that's why I was trying to get to her. And I had always imagined a female narrator at the beginning of this whole thing because of all the men's voices. You know, you hear all these guy voices and stuff. So I wanted a female voice to help complement. And I couldn't think of who I should get. And Francisco, this descendant, said, well, I'm friends with Loretta Swit. And I'm thinking, well, I'm watching MASH, and all she's doing is screaming. She screams at Hawkeye. You know, I couldn't hear her voice. And I'm thinking, I can't have a screamy voice, you know, because this thing is close to 2 hours long, and I thought, no, my audience will kill me. And, but I thought, well, I'll give it a shot. And so she agreed to come on, but you have to understand, I had already recorded all these other voices, and I was running around campus, and if I heard somebody who sounded really good, you know, like a chancellor, I would drag him in and say, okay, read this diary. So I had all these people, you know, even my husband. I had to tell my husband that he was replaced by Alec Baldwin. Yeah, okay? And then I had to go back and tell all these other people who they were replaced by, okay? But when she said, well, how can I help? And I said, well, I'm thinking about if you just help me with 2 of the generals. Now, I have 17 diaries in this, okay? And I've got poems, and I have all this other stuff. So I was just thinking she was just going to make 1 or 2 phone calls. It was a Sunday morning, and it was another time when grandchildren were visiting, you know, and it was a Sunday, and I had like 24 hours left, and they were about to be murdered. And she picks up the phone, you know, she calls, and she says, look, I just got off the phone with Robert Wagner and Don Murray. They'd love to read some parts. Here's their home phone numbers. Call them. Click. This went on all Sunday, one day, like every 20 minutes, she was calling me with phone numbers, personal phone numbers, and email addresses, okay, to call these people. And, you know, it takes courage. You know, I don't know about you guys, but I have a really hard time making a cold call and, you know, saying, hi, do you want to? Well, the upshot was the next day I had to get the courage, and I got answering machines. They're not interested. This is easy. I'll just get answering machines for the rest of my life, and I'll be able to do this. Well, 1 hour later, phone rings. Hey, Jan, Robert Wagner's on the phone. Phone rings. Hey, Don Murray's on the phone. So within 3 weeks, I only had 3 weeks to record all these actors and actresses, and that was last summer of 2012. So I pulled this all across the finish line on April 1st of this year. Okay? So that's why it took 22 years. It took a long time. Does this still work? Okay, or it only works over here. A couple people who else I'd like to thank, though. Of course, I need to thank the Evergreen Air and Space Museum for allowing me to show this film. And, of course, Ken Buckles, who I know is somewhere in the audience, that's making this happen. Another person who I'd like to kind of point out who introduced himself to me is a Mr. Betts. And his uncle, would it be your uncle then who was executed? Yeah. There's a poem in the film that was written for his dad because his dad and his brother and his dad's brother, uncle, were together. Were they not? Right. And the brother got executed. So when you hear this poem that's read by Kathleen Turner, 10 Men Must Die, it's Mr. Betts' uncle. Okay? So, other than that, one last thing. The other thing that I had a hard time with this project is there's a lot of dark humor. It's okay to laugh. Please laugh, because humor was part of their survival mechanism. Okay? So thank you.